The life of Maurice Bishop began in Aruba, 1944. The son of working-class Grenadian parents who had left their homeland in search of better wages. His father, Rupert Bishop, once earned just 5 pence a day back in Grenada, barely enough to survive. Like many West Indians of that era, they were part of the economic migration wave that sought dignity abroad when prosperity seemed impossible at home. But Grenada was never far from their hearts. When Maurice was still a child, the family returned to their island roots. It was there in the heat of post-colonial tension and the rhythm of island life that Bishop's political awakening began. Raised by politically active parents, he was a curious boy who loved history. He devoured tales of resistance, Julian Fidele's 1795 rebellion in Grenada, Haiti's slave revolution 1791, and the resulting rise of Haitian leaders like Henri Christophe. He was especially inspired by the Cuban Revolution and the way Fidel Castro and Che Guevara defied American dominance just miles away. As a young man, Bishop won a scholarship to study law in London. But it wasn't just legal theory that shaped him, it was the ferment of global struggle. The 1960s in London was a hub of radical thought. Black power, anti-colonialism, and socialism were everywhere. Bishop soaked it in. He began to fuse legal knowledge with Marxist theory, seeing law not as a tool of order, but as a weapon for justice. His worldview sharpened as political fires burned across the Caribbean. Walter Rodney ignited minds in Guyana, and Michael Manley steered Jamaica toward democratic socialism. When Maurice Bishop returned to Grenada in the early 1970s, he wasn't just a man with a law degree. He was a radical political force, shaped by global revolution and grounded in Caribbean realities. He settled in the capital, St. George's, and quickly set up the New Jewel movement, a coalition of young idealists, trade unionists, and Marxist thinkers. The movement's name stood for Joint Endeavor for Welfare, Education, and Liberation, a vision that promised to uplift the poor and challenge corruption. At the time, Grenada was still under the long shadow of British colonialism. Though it would later gain independence in 1974, real power rested with Prime Minister Eric Gairy, a flamboyant and authoritarian figure. In the 1940s and 1950s, Gairy had been a firebrand, a working-class hero who led revolts against the white plantation elite, demanding better wages and labor rights for Grenadian workers. His organizing efforts sparked the legendary 1951 general strike, which forced the colonial government to hold the island's first general elections. A champion of workers' rights, Gairy's regime gradually became marked by economic hardship, violence, and a personal militia known as the Mongoose Gang. As discontent spread across the island, the New Jewel movement quickly rose as Gairy's most formidable opposition. Through community organizing, literacy programs, and anti-corruption messaging, Bishop gained the trust of the people, especially the youth and the working class. But Gairy struck back. Bishop was arrested, detained, and kept under surveillance. The Mongoose Gang frequently harassed him and his allies. On January 21, 1974, a day now known as Bloody Monday, police under Eric Gairy's government opened fire on peaceful demonstrators, but among those killed was Rupert Bishop, Maurice's own father, a respected community leader who had marched for justice. Shot dead while trying to shield young protesters, his death sent shockwaves through the island. By 1979, the stakes had escalated. Bishop, fearing another imminent arrest, went underground. Then, seizing the moment while Gairy was abroad, he and his comrades launched a peaceful, bloodless coup. Not a single shot was fired. Bishop took inspiration from Fidel Castro's own bold move in Cuba, toppling a dictatorship while the leader was out of the country. The New Jewel movement swiftly assumed power. Bishop declared a people's revolutionary government, with Bernard Cord as his deputy, and Jacqueline Kreft, his close confidant and Minister of Education, helping to lead reform. In March of 1979, Maurice Bishop became Prime Minister of Grenada, not by election, but by revolution. And almost overnight, the island began to change. Under the People's Revolutionary Government, Bishop launched one of the most ambitious reform programs in Caribbean history. Healthcare and education were made free. Literacy campaigns spread across the island, with children and adults alike learning to read and write, some for the first time. Agricultural cooperatives were formed. Farmers pooled land and resources, moving away from the old colonial model of plantation inequality. Unemployment, which had once been nearly 50%, plummeted to just 14% within 4 years. Internationally, Bishop aligned Grenada with Cuba and other Soviet-friendly nations, but remained fiercely independent. He welcomed Cuban doctors, engineers, and teachers who helped build roads, airports, and health clinics. The partnership transformed the island's infrastructure. But not everyone welcomed Grenada's revolution. The United States and several conservative Caribbean nations began to grow suspicious. The timing didn't help. Across the sea, the Sandinista revolution had just toppled Nicaragua's US-backed dictator, Anastasio Somoza. To Washington, Grenada looked like the next domino. American media painted Grenada as a new Soviet outpost. Reports swirled about Cuban troops, military bases, and secret alliances. Even though Bishop publicly stated his desire for friendly relations with both the USA and the USSR, the narrative was set. But fears ran deeper than ideology. With Grenada's population overwhelmingly black, and America home to over 13 million black citizens, U.S. officials feared the symbolic power of a successful black socialist state in the Western Hemisphere. A new wave of Negro radicalism, as some internal memos called it, could not be allowed to spread. Economic pressure soon followed. The International Monetary Fund withheld credit, stalling Grenada's development. Investment dried up. The revolution was working, but the walls were beginning to close in. Still, Bishop held firm. He believed Grenada could be both revolutionary and sovereign. But with American eyes fixed on the island, and pressure mounting from both outside and within, storm clouds were gathering over the world's newest socialist experiment. By late 1983, the revolution was fraying not from outside but from within. Tensions inside the New Jewel movement leadership had been building for months. A hardline Marxist faction, led by Bishop's own deputy Bernard Cord, grew frustrated with what they saw as Bishop's moderate socialism and charismatic one-man leadership. Cord and his allies accused Bishop of straying from pure Marxist doctrine, of prioritizing popularity over revolution. They demanded power be shared. Bishop refused. On October 13, 1983, Bishop was placed under house arrest by his own government. The people of Grenada, who had followed him from the beginning, rose in protest. Just days later, on October 19th, protesters stormed the gates and freed him. For a few brief hours, hope returned. Bishop stood once again among his supporters. But the joy was short-lived. Grenadian soldiers loyal to Cord quickly moved in. Bishop, along with several members of his cabinet, including Jacqueline Kreft, his close political and personal companion, were captured and taken to Fort Rupert. That afternoon, without trial or delay, they were lined up and executed by firing squad. 6 days after Maurice Bishop's assassination, the United States launched an invasion. Codenamed Operation Urgent Fury, the mission was presented as a rescue of American medical students and a response to growing instability. But behind the official narrative, historians believe it was a clear statement. Socialism, especially black socialism, would not be allowed to thrive in the Western Hemisphere. Grenada's revolution was over. In less than a week, the People's Revolutionary Government had been dismantled. A parliamentary democracy was restored under close watch of Western powers. The island's brief, bold experiment had ended in blood and invasion. And yet, Maurice Bishop never vanished from the hearts of his people. For many, he remains a symbol of what could have been, a leader who dared to dream beyond colonial shadows. Though Maurice Bishop's life was cut short, the legacy of his vision endures. His government's sweeping investments in education and healthcare left behind a transformed Grenada. New schools were built, literacy rates soared, and access to healthcare became a right, not a privilege. And in a fitting tribute to the man who dared to dream of a sovereign and self-sufficient Grenada, the island's international gateway now carries his name, the Maurice Bishop International Airport. And though history debates the choices he made, the impact of his leadership on the people, the land, and the soul of Grenada is undeniable. Thanks for watching another Fresh K documentary. Please leave a comment below and let us know what you feel about the life of Maurice Bishop.
Grenada had a revolution.
Mm.
And it was the best thing that happened to Grenada in the history of Grenada. As we speak currently, there was nothing better than the revolution.
Wow.
And the revolution government, they did more than any other government, present and past.